The words landed on Mark like a shovel to the ribs, sharp and unexpected, echoing from the kitchen as he held his daughters close. "I need my own life," Amy had said to Brenda, her voice flat, dismissing every vow, every shared moment, every quiet sacrifice he'd made for them. He stood exposed, watching her prepare to leave, while she simply zipped her bag and turned away. Mark Miller, at 44, felt the floor shifting beneath him in ways he could not name. His home in Springfield, Illinois, once a place of predictable comfort, now hummed with a different frequency. For 17 years, he and Amy, 38, had built a life here, raising their daughters, Megan, 14, and Grace, 12. Now the quiet shifts were becoming less subtle, like cracks appearing in dry pavement. Amy had transformed. She had once been a devoted stay-at-home mom, her days structured around school runs and dinner preparations. But Delights in Time, the catering business she co-owned with her sister, Brenda, had swallowed that Amy whole. Mark remembered encouraging her, giving her the seed money. He had seen it as a creative outlet, something to give her purpose beyond the demands of motherhood. He never imagined it would become this. Late nights and whispered calls became Amy's new normal. Family dinners, once a sacred ritual, were often delayed or eaten without her. The quiet evenings they used to share on the couch, half watching television, had simply vanished. Mark observed the changes, the different scent on her clothes when she finally came home. Not his cologne, not the girl's shampoo, but something else, something professional and vaguely floral. He watched her energy too, how it pulsed with a new kind of restless ambition. The business had not just found its feet, it had exploded. Delights in Time was everywhere, catering events for the local elite, propelling Amy and Brenda into a social sphere Mark rarely visited. His mother, Marge, had stepped in more frequently to care for Megan and Grace. Initially, Mark appreciated the help. Marge was good with the girls, dependable, but soon the arrangement became unsettling. It felt less like a temporary fix and more like a permanent substitute for Amy's presence. After a particularly grueling period of successful events, a flurry of weddings and corporate galas, Amy announced another 2-day seminar in Chicago. The words hit Mark with the dull thud of a repeated mistake. His frustration, long simmering beneath the surface, began to boil. "I can't believe you're leaving now." Mark said, his voice low, trying to keep the tremor out of it. He watched her pack, tossing clothes into an overnight bag with a practiced hand. "All I heard for 2 months was that things would be normal again after the Peterson wedding. That we'd have time." Amy paused, looking up, her expression unreadable. "Mark, this is important. It's for the business." He stepped closer, standing in the doorway of their bedroom. "Your dedication makes me wonder if there's something else happening," he said, the words hanging heavy in the air between them. He watched her face for any flicker of recognition, any tell. She met his gaze, her denial immediate and vehement. "There is nothing else happening, Mark. This is Delights in Time. This is our future. What are you even suggesting?" Her voice held a hint of ice, a tone he hadn't heard often, but recognized. "You promise," Biden continued, ignoring her question. "You always promise you'll make it up to me and the girls. But I've heard your promises many times. We seem to be forgotten when these opportunities come along." He thought of the missed soccer games, the school plays Amy had only caught the last 10 minutes of. No matter what life threw our way, we said we'd always be there for each other. What happened to that promise, Amy? Her hands stilled on the zipper of her bag, her jaw tightened. "Enough," she snapped, her voice sharper than he'd heard in years. "I need to attend this seminar, and that's final. Just accept it." A tense silence fell in the room, thick and suffocating. Amy felt a flicker of something, perhaps guilt, but she pushed it down. Her ambition, she told herself, was justified. This was for their future, for her future. Later that day, Mark was at work, but the conversation replayed in his head. He imagined Amy and Brenda sitting over lunch, Brenda likely picking at a salad, Amy talking about the seminar. He knew Brenda had her own marital woes, had admitted to Amy that her husband Frank seemed happier when she was away, that divorce felt imminent for them. He pictured Brenda advising Amy in her practical, no-nonsense way. "Your marriage and family are more crucial than another trip, Amy." Mark could almost hear the words, and he could hear Amy's dismissive reply, the sentiment he'd been dreading, the one that would confirm his growing fears. I need my own life. He imagined her saying it with a quiet determination, a statement of fact that left no room for debate. Mark felt hollowed out, as if a quiet wind had blown through the house, taking familiar pieces with it. He started observing Amy more closely, though from a distance, like a scientist studying a new perplexing specimen. There were the new clothes, sharper, less utilitarian than her usual outfits, and the way she held her phone, always angled away from him, often locked. Her words had a new subtle evasiveness, a slight detour around direct questions about her day. He tried to confide in Marge, his mother, one afternoon when she was over helping with the girls. "Mom, things feel off with Amy," he said, his voice quiet, looking out at the cornfields that bordered their property. Marge paused, her hands resting on the kitchen counter. She was perceptive, but her lens was one of pragmatism. "Mark, she's working hard. Running a business takes a lot out of a person. She's just tired, that's all. This is what you wanted for her, remember?" She tried to reassure him, her voice gentle. "Amy's a good woman. Always has been." Amy returned from the seminar 2 days later, appearing re-energized, a buzz about her that felt foreign. She offered superficial apologies, quick words about how much she missed them, how busy she was. Mark nodded, his own words sticking in his throat. Megan and Grace, always perceptive, started asking questions. "Why is Mom always so busy, Dad?" Grace asked one evening, tugging on his shirt. "Is she tired all the time now?" Megan chimed in, her brow furrowed with a child's concern. Mark didn't have good answers. He began to track Amy's car mileage, a meticulous habit he hadn't known he possessed. He'd note the odometer reading before she left and again when she returned. The numbers didn't always align with her reported trips. Small discrepancies at first, then larger ones, creating gaps that his mind struggled to fill. A few days later, he found Brenda at the local grocery store, pushing a cart overflowing with catering supplies. He approached her, trying to keep his voice casual. "Brenda," he started, "how was that seminar in Chicago? Amy said you two were going together." He watched her closely, feeling a tremor in his own voice he couldn't quite suppress. Brenda's eyes darted away for a fraction of a second, then back to him. She cleared her throat. "Oh, it was good. Lot of new ideas." She fumbled with a bag of artisanal cheese. "Yeah, Amy seemed to get a lot out of it," Mark pushed, his gaze unwavering. "She said you were there for the whole thing." Brenda looked genuinely uncomfortable. Her smile faltered. "Well, not the most recent one. I had a conflict with a client meeting. A big one. It was a last-minute change. Amy went alone." Her voice dropped slightly at the end, as if she knew she was treading on thin ice. The words hung in the air between them, solid and cold. Mark felt the cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach, hardening into conviction. It was true. His suspicions, once vague anxieties, now had a name. He thanked Brenda, his voice flat, and walked away, the fluorescent lights of the grocery store suddenly too bright, too harsh. He recalled a conversation he'd had months ago with a colleague, a man named Dave whose marriage had crumbled. Dave's words echoed in his mind, chilling and precise. "Don't accuse till you know, Mark. Don't say a thing until you have something solid. Otherwise, you're just crazy." The advice at the time had seemed cynical, detached. Now it felt like a command. Mark went home, and that evening after the girls were asleep and Amy was out for a supposed late meeting, he quietly ordered a discreet GPS tracker online. When it arrived 2 days later, he waited until Amy had left for work, then slipped out to her car. He found a secure spot beneath the bumper, the small device clicking into place with a magnetic thud. The act felt invasive, a trespass against the intimacy they once shared, but also necessary, a key to unlock the anxiety churning inside him. The GPS data started coming in, cold and factual, confirming his fears with brutal efficiency. Frequent, unexplained detours, not to client sites, not to the supplier's warehouse, to a specific address in a different part of town, a quiet residential street, not far from the catering kitchen, but definitely not related to it. One evening, Amy called to say she was working late, a client emergency. Mark listened, his hand gripping the phone. After she hung up, he checked the GPS. The dot on the screen was stationary at the familiar residential address. He told Megan and Grace he had to run a quick errand. The drive felt surreal, the familiar streets of Springfield blurring past his windows. He pulled onto the quiet street, parking a block away, turning off his headlights. Amy's car was there, unmistakable under a street lamp. He waited in the dark, watching. After 20 minutes, the porch light of the house flipped on. The front door opened. A man emerged, tall and lean, his silhouette distinct against the warm glow from inside. He pulled Amy close, a lingering embrace that lasted longer than a friendly goodbye. Then he disappeared back inside, leaving Amy alone for a moment before she got into her car and drove away. Mark drove home in a daze, the Midwestern night air doing nothing to cool the raging fire in his chest. "So it's true," he whispered to the empty car, the words tasting like ash. He spent the rest of the night in his home office, the glow of his computer screen illuminating his grim face. He began to meticulously document everything: dates, times, GPS coordinates, mileage inconsistencies. A cold, calculated anger replaced the initial pain, a quiet resolve forming. He would not be the only one to pay the price. Mark decided to wait until the girls were at school. He brewed coffee, the mundane ritual a stark contrast to the earthquake rumbling inside him. When Amy came into the kitchen, he was sitting at the table, his laptop open. He didn't raise his voice. There was no shouting, no histrionics, just a quiet, devastating calm. He pushed the laptop slightly toward her, revealing a map with a red dot on a residential street, surrounded by timestamps and mileage logs. Next to it, a few blurry photos pulled from the night before, undeniable in their implication. "GPS data," he said, his voice flat. "Photographs, and a few call logs I managed to recover." Amy's face went from confusion to shock, then to furious denial. "You went through my phone? You tracked me?" Her voice rose, sharp and indignant. "You're stalking me, Mark. This is paranoia." Mark looked at her, his eyes unwavering. "I watched you, Amy," he said, the words cutting through her anger. "I watched you walk into his house last night." The air left Amy's lungs, her shoulders slumped. The defiance drained from her, replaced by a terrible stillness. Then the dam broke. She crumpled into a chair, burying her face in her hands, her body shaking with sobs. She confessed, the words tumbling out, broken by gasps and tears. A 2-year affair, with a business associate, a man named Lyle. She spoke of Mark's increasing distance, her own need for validation, how she felt seen by Lyle. "I felt so alive with him, Mark," she sobbed, her voice muffled. "You just didn't see me anymore." 2 years, the words echoed in Mark's head, a visceral punch to the gut. 17 years of marriage, 2 years of lies. He felt a cold rage bloom in his chest, so intense it was almost peaceful. He thought of all the nights he'd waited, all the promises, all the excuses. His mind replayed every moment, filtering it through this new, brutal truth. He looked at her, still weeping, and asked the question that had been burning a hole in his quiet resolve. "Does he know about the girls? Does he know about our family?" Amy avoided his gaze, her silence a confirmation. He already knew the answer. "You need to tell Megan and Grace that we're separating," Mark said, his voice devoid of emotion. Amy's head shot up, her eyes wide with fresh fear. "No, I can't, not now. Think about what it will do to them, what it will do to delights in time. My image, Mark." "Your image?" Mark's voice was low, laced with venom. "You want your own life, Amy? Then live it. But not in this house, not with my children." He didn't need to say more, the message was clear. Amy stood, her face blotchy and tear-streaked. She moved through the house in a daze, pulling a small suitcase from the back of her closet. The silence was heavy, suffocating, punctuated only by her sniffles and the rustle of clothes. It was then that Megan and Grace returned from school, earlier than expected due to a half-day. They walked in through the back door, their usual chatter dying on their lips as they sensed the icy tension. They saw Amy, clutching a packed bag, her face red and swollen. They saw Mark, standing rigid by the window, his back to them, his shoulders stiff. The girls' faces went pale, confused. They exchanged a look, piecing together the shattered fragments of what they overheard, the hushed words, the raw emotion. Just as Amy was zipping the suitcase, the front door opened again. Marge. She took one look at Amy's tear-streaked face and Mark's stone-faced profile, and her expression tightened. "What on earth is going on here?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Mark turned, his gaze meeting his mother's. He decided in that moment what he would say. For the girl's sake, for now, he would omit the ugliest truth. "Amy's leaving, Mom," he stated, his voice flat, emotionless. "We're getting divorced." Amy started to protest, but Mark's stare silenced her. She picked up her bag, her eyes darting between Mark and the girls. Megan, her young voice trembling, stepped forward. "Mom," she whispered, her eyes wide. "What's happening? Why are you leaving?" Amy looked at her daughter, then at Grace, who was now clutching Megan's arm. She opened her mouth, but only vague, unsatisfying answers seemed to come out. Something about needing space, about work, about how much she loved them. The words felt hollow, even to Mark. Mark stood by the window, watching Amy get into her car, her small suitcase tossed onto the passenger seat. She drove away, the car disappearing down the quiet street, leaving a hollow echo. He felt no relief, only a chilling resolve for what would come next. The immediate aftermath was a desolate landscape, a quiet house filled with unspoken questions. Mark moved through it like a ghost, struggling to maintain a semblance of normalcy for Megan and Grace. He cooked meals, helped with homework, tried to fill the sudden, gaping hole left by Amy's departure. Each day was a performance, a deliberate effort to project strength he didn't feel. Amy, meanwhile, had moved into a temporary apartment, likely expecting him to cool down, for them to eventually reconcile, or at least negotiate amicably. That expectation was a luxury Mark was no longer afforded. Brenda called him a few days later, her voice laced with concern. "Mark, how are things? Amy's really struggling. Maybe you two should consider counseling. Talk it out." "Too late for that, Brenda," Mark replied curtly, his voice flat. He offered no further explanation, just the finality of the statement. Brenda paused, sensing the wall he'd erected. Marge, however, became a steady anchor. She came over almost daily, her presence a quiet comfort, her hands busy with laundry or a meal. She didn't pry, just offered unwavering support, understanding that some things were beyond words. She knew the truth, not the affair, but the brokenness. Mark initiated divorce proceedings with a cold resolve. He consulted David Thorne, a shrewd attorney in downtown Springfield known for his aggressive tactics and no-nonsense approach. "I want this handled thoroughly, David," Mark instructed, his voice even. "Every detail. I don't want any surprises." Thorne nodded, a grim understanding in his eyes. Amy was blindsided. She had not anticipated the swiftness, the severity of Mark's actions. The legal papers, served formally, shattered her illusions of a quick, quiet separation. Finally, she revealed the affair to Brenda, seeking sympathy, a confidant in her suddenly crumbling world. Brenda listened, her expression changing from concern to shock, then to hurt. "Amy, how could you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Brenda felt a profound betrayal, not just for Mark, but for herself. She worried about the impact on Delights in Time, their shared dream, their reputation in a small city like Springfield. The foundation of their partnership felt suddenly unstable. Meanwhile, Megan and Grace began to exhibit behavioral changes. Megan, usually outgoing, withdrew into herself, spending hours in her room, her door slightly ajar, but her presence distant. Grace, the younger, became clingy, anxious, her eyes constantly searching Mark's face for reassurance. One evening, Mark heard a soft crying from Megan's room. He stood outside her door listening. "It's all my fault," he heard her whisper, her voice choked with tears. "They fought because of me." A fresh wave of grief and anger washed over Mark. This was the cost of Amy's choices, and his children were paying it. Amy attempted to visit the girls a few times, dropping by unannounced. Mark set firm boundaries. "All communication goes through me or the lawyers, Amy," he stated, his voice calm but unyielding. "The girls need stability right now. Your presence is causing emotional instability." She argued, but Mark held firm, closing the door on her. The financial discussions began. Thorne, Mark's attorney, proposed a settlement that significantly undervalued Amy's contributions to their shared assets, and more importantly, her equity in Delights in Time. The numbers were harsh, calculated to reflect Mark's anger and her perceived breach of trust. Amy, now relying on Brenda and even Lyle for advice, was advised to fight back. This was her business, her passion. The legal battle escalated, the initial shock turning into a bitter war. Mark, in his own way, began to fight back in the social arena. Subtly, discreetly, he began using his business connections, his network of engineers and community leaders. He didn't make direct accusations, but he planted seeds of doubt. A quiet word here, a knowing look there. He hinted at Amy's infidelity, at her priorities shifting, at the sudden unraveling of their perfect family. The local social scene, once a source of immense pride for Amy, became subtly colder. Invitations dwindled. Heads turned when she entered a room. She felt eyes on her, whispers in her wake, the subtle shift in the social currents of Springfield. Through it all, Mark dedicated himself to Megan and Grace. He helped them with homework, attended their school events, sat through their soccer games on cold Saturday mornings. He made sure they felt loved, seen, and secure. Even as his own heart hardened, a cold, unyielding core forming where warmth used to be, he would protect his daughters. Mark was driven by a quiet, Midwestern sense of justice, one that favored methodical payback over dramatic explosions. He began to meticulously plan his reckoning, not with a sudden burst of anger, but with the cold, deliberate precision of an engineer. His focus was clear: dismantle Amy's newfound identity and security, piece by careful piece. He understood that Delights in Time was more than a business. It was her lifeblood, the source of her validation, and the first target for his strategic dismantling. He started subtly, using his influence within the community. During casual conversations at Rotary meetings or while picking up takeout from the local diner, he would let slip carefully chosen details about Amy's recent behavior, painting a picture of a woman whose priorities had shifted dramatically. Nothing explicit, just enough to plant seeds of doubt among key clients and influential figures who valued stability and discretion. Then came the first direct blow. Meyer pulled his substantial financial investment on from Delights in Time. He called Amy, his voice calm, explaining his decision. Given the circumstances, Amy, and a general lack of trust, I'm withdrawing my capital from the business. It's effective immediately. He didn't elaborate, leaving the statement to hang, heavy with unspoken accusations. Amy and Brenda were shocked. We need that capital, Mark, Amy pleaded over the phone, her voice tinged with panic. You know how tight things are after the expansion. Brenda, hearing the news, felt a chill. The immediate financial strain was severe. The business was built on a lean margin, and Mark's seed money had been critical working capital. During the ongoing divorce proceedings, Mark's attorney, Thorne, began to raise pointed questions about the business's finances and, more critically, Amy's time management. He implied neglect, suggesting that Amy's frequent absences and seminar trips were not always in the best interest of Delights in Time. Lyle, Amy's lover, offered financial support, sensing the growing instability. But Brenda, ever the pragmatist, was wary. Lyle, I appreciate the offer, she told him, but mixing personal finances with professional integrity, especially now, feels like a bad idea. She was trying to protect their business, even as she watched it begin to wobble. Mark moved to his next strategic move, filing for sole physical custody of Megan and Grace. His argument was built on Amy's undeniable absenteeism and what he termed her unstable lifestyle, carefully citing the seminar trips, the late nights, and the general disruption to the girls' lives. Amy was outraged. This was different, a threat that struck at her core. He can't take my girls, she screamed at Brenda, her voice cracking with a fear Mark hadn't heard before. This challenge to her motherhood felt truly existential. The custody battle forced Amy to reveal more explicit details of her affair to her legal team. Lyle's identity, his involvement, the timeline, it all came out, painful and exposed. Mark's lawyer subtly highlighted Amy's pattern of prioritizing her affair over her family commitments, using the meticulously documented seminar excuses as irrefutable proof. Marge, steady and unwavering, provided a statement to Mark's attorney, supporting his parental dedication. She painted Amy as increasingly absent, a picture that resonated with the cold facts. Brenda, caught between her sister and Mark, felt immense pressure. The business, Delights in Time, was starting to falter. Clients, sensing the underlying tension, began to quietly withdraw. The whispers Mark had started were now amplified, eroding their reputation. Amidst the escalating legal battle, Mark received an anonymous tip about Lyle's past. Questionable business dealings, a history of financial impropriety in a prior venture. Mark discreetly passed the information to Thorne, knowing it would be filed away, ready to be used if needed. He began to feel the emotional toll of his carefully constructed plan. The satisfaction of revenge, cold and bitter, mixed with a profound emptiness. He would catch glimpses of Megan's distant gaze, Grace's quiet anxiety, and the cost of his retribution would weigh on him. He had set a course, and he would see it through, but the journey was not without its own pain. The intricate dance of revenge and consequence had only just begun. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Delights in Time began to bleed. Major contracts, once secured with a handshake and a smile, started to unravel. The phone calls that used to bring new bookings now delivered polite cancellations. Rumors of Amy's affair, fueled by Mark's subtle hints and the escalating divorce proceedings, circulated through Springfield like an insidious virus, poisoning the well of their clientele. The once vibrant catering business now felt like a slowly deflating balloon. Brenda confronted Amy in the quiet of their empty kitchen, her voice tight with despair. "People are talking, Amy. Mrs. Henderson just pulled the entire charity gala, said she heard things. Our reputation is shot. What are we going to do?" Lyle, sensing the danger, attempted to intervene. He called Mark, leaving several messages, but Mark refused to speak with him. All communication was routed through Thorne, his attorney, who ensured Lyle's attempts were met with a wall of professional silence. Then, Mark's lawyer made his move. He discreetly leaked the information about Lyle's shaky business past to a local journalist, framing it not as gossip, but as a financial scandal implicitly tied to Delights in Time. The article was carefully crafted, hinting at ethical concerns and subtly linking Amy, Lyle, and the catering business to the crumbling Miller marriage. A sensational article appeared in the Springfield Standard, its headlines hinting at impropriety. Amy was devastated. She held the paper, her hands trembling, the black ink blurring before her eyes. Her carefully constructed world, her image, her independence, it was all collapsing. "He's trying to destroy me," she cried to Brenda, the words torn from her. The article was a major financial hit. Clients pulled out in droves. Brenda and Amy, desperate, sat down with their books, facing the grim reality that they would need to consider layoffs. The women who had helped them build their dream, who relied on Delights in Time for their own livelihoods, would soon be out of work. The whispers, once contained to adult circles, now seeped into the school. Megan and Grace, hearing snippets from classmates, confronted Mark with heartbreaking questions. "Is Mom a bad person, Dad?" Grace asked, her eyes wide with a child's innocent confusion. Megan, older and more aware, just looked at him, her silence heavier than any question. Mark struggled, trying to protect their innocence, while acknowledging the truth that was now undeniably public. "Mom made some bad choices, sweethearts," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "It doesn't make her a bad person, but her choices hurt our family." He watched their faces, seeing the dawning comprehension, the pain he couldn't shield them from. Amy's relationship with Lyle, once a source of thrill and validation, became strained under the intense public pressure. He blamed her for his public exposure, for the scrutiny on his past. "This is all on you, Amy," he snapped during one tense phone call, his voice devoid of the charm that had once drawn her in. Marge, seeing Mark's quiet determination and the toll it was taking, offered to help financially. "Mark, I have some savings. Let me help you with the girls, with the house." Mark politely declined. "I appreciate it, Mom, but I need to handle this myself." His pride, bruised and battered, remained unwavering. He would not be pitied. He arranged therapy for Megan and Grace, understanding the emotional scars the divorce and the public spectacle were leaving. He sat in the waiting room, listening to the muffled voices from the therapist's office, knowing this was a wound he couldn't heal, only manage. A grim satisfaction settled over Mark when he learned Delights in Time had lost another important catering contract, this time to a rival business. It was another victory, another chip taken from Amy's empire. Brenda, however, was becoming increasingly isolated and resentful. She saw the wreckage around them, the business she had poured her heart into crumbling. She began to consider severing her business ties with Amy, the partnership feeling less like a shared dream and more like a sinking ship. Mark saw the collateral damage. Brenda, his daughters, even the employees of Delights in Time. A flicker of doubt surfaced in his cold resolve. His revenge was affecting innocent people, and for the first time the cost felt heavier than the satisfaction. The walls of Delights in Time were closing in. Brenda, her face etched with worry lines Mark had never seen before, finally delivered the news to Amy. "I can't afford to stay in this, Amy," she said, her voice strained. "If things don't turn around soon, I'm going to lose everything. My house, my savings. I just can't." Amy, desperate, tried to reason with Mark. She called him repeatedly, then sent text messages, pleading for him to stop the public and financial attacks. "Mark, for the girl's sake, please," she wrote, appealing to their shared past, to the remnants of a life they'd built. Mark read the message, his expression unreadable. He thought of Megan's quiet tears, Grace's anxious questions. His finger hovered over the reply button. "For the girl's sake," he finally typed, his voice flat in his own mind. "You should have thought about them 2 years ago." He hit send, the words a cold, undeniable truth. Lyle's own business began to face scrutiny, the seeds of doubt planted by Thorne now blossoming into full investigations. He became increasingly distant, unreliable. The calls from Amy went unanswered more often than not. The charm that had once captivated her now felt like a thin veneer over a core of self-preservation. One afternoon, Amy, driven by a gnawing suspicion, followed Lyle. She watched him meet another woman, not just for coffee, but for a lingering lunch, followed by an even more lingering goodbye. The devastating revelation left her feeling utterly alone, betrayed by the very man she had upended her life for. She confronted Lyle, her voice shaking with rage and despair. He offered no apology, no pretense of regret. "I'm moving on, Amy," he said, his voice clipped. "This whole mess with Mark, the public stuff, I'm not built for this kind of drama." He walked away, leaving her standing in the sterile quiet of a nearly empty parking lot, the Midwestern sun suddenly feeling cold. The custody battle intensified. Mark's lawyer, Thorne, presented a strong case, emphasizing Amy's diminished capacity to provide a stable home, highlighting her absences, her newly precarious financial situation, and the public scandal. Megan and Grace, now accustomed to the appointments, were interviewed by a court-appointed psychologist. They expressed their confusion and sadness, their young voices wavering, but both stated they missed their mother, yet felt more secure, more grounded with their father. The words, when Thorne relayed them, struck Mark with a fresh pang of complex emotion. Amy faced mounting legal fees. Her apartment, once a symbol of her independence, now felt like a cage of her own making. Her financial security, once tied to Mark's steady income and her thriving business, was crumbling. Mark observed Amy's despair from afar, through the legal reports and the occasional glimpse of her in court. He felt a pang of something akin to pity, a fleeting recognition of the wreckage he had wrought. But the memory of his own pain, the 2 years of quiet betrayal, quickly suppressed it. Brenda, seeing Amy's complete breakdown, knew she had to make a choice. Delights in Time was still hers to fight for. She decided to keep the business afloat herself, sending Amy a formal offer. Either buy her out or leave. She couldn't watch it sink with her sister clinging to the mast. In a strange twist, Frank, Brenda's estranged husband, re-entered her life. He offered quiet, unwavering support during her business crisis, his presence a steadying force. He hinted at a potential reconciliation, a quiet rebuilding amidst the chaos. Mark's lawyer, thorough as ever, uncovered a hidden asset of Amy's, a small trust fund her parents had set up years ago, meant for a rainy day. It became another chip in the high-stakes financial negotiations, another point of leverage for Mark. Sitting alone in his quiet house late one night, surrounded by legal documents and the lingering scent of his daughter's childhood, Mark wrestled with the morality of his actions. Was the cost of his revenge too high? Especially for Megan and Grace, who were caught in the crossfire? He had achieved his goals, broken Amy, dismantled her life. But the satisfaction was hollow, replaced by a bitter emptiness. He confided in Marge, his mother, during one of her visits. "Mom, sometimes I wonder if this was all worth it," he admitted, looking out at the dark cornfields. Marge placed a hand on his arm, her grip gentle but firm. "Revenge is a cold meal, son," she said, her voice soft but knowing. "It doesn't always taste as good as you think it will." Amy had reached the rock bottom. Lyle was gone. Delights in time was slipping from her grasp, and the potential loss of custody of her daughters loomed large. She felt the heavy weight of consequence pressing down on her, leaving her breathless and utterly alone. In a desperate, tearful attempt, she went to the girls' school during a scheduled pickup, hoping to intercept them. "Girls, please," she pleaded, her voice choked. "I promise to change. I'll be here. Just please, let me make it right." Megan and Grace looked at her, wary and confused, their faces mirroring the pain they'd carried for months. They hugged her, but the embrace was tentative, a fragile connection that couldn't mend what was broken. Mark, after much deliberation with Thorne, extended a final settlement offer. It was harsh, but fair, given the circumstances. Significantly reduced alimony, joint legal custody to allow Amy some say in their upbringing, but Mark would retain primary physical custody. The girls would live with him. The settlement also included the sale of her share in Delights in Time to Brenda at a fair, though not generous, price. It was the only way for the business to survive. Amy initially refused, wanting to fight for more to salvage some semblance of her former life. But her lawyer, a weary man who had seen too many lost causes, advised her bluntly, "Your position is weak, Amy. Your financial situation is dire. Further litigation would bankrupt you." The words were a bitter pill, but the truth in them was undeniable. Now, with the upper hand, and seeing Amy's utter defeat, Mark allowed a final, unmonitored meeting between Amy and the girls. No lawyers, no restrictions, just a few hours alone. He watched them walk into the local park, his stomach a knot of apprehension. During that meeting, Amy finally offered a sincere apology to her daughters. She didn't make excuses, didn't blame Mark or circumstances. Her voice was raw, honest, stripped bare of all pretense. "I messed up, girls," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I truly did. I let you down, and I am so, so sorry." Megan and Grace, though still hurt, listened. They didn't forgive her fully, not yet, but they appreciated her honesty, a small, tentative step towards healing. Amy confronted Mark one last time in the cold, neutral territory of the lawyer's office after the settlement was signed. Her voice was quiet, devoid of anger, only raw exhaustion. "Are you happy now, Mark?" she asked, her gaze steady, truly seeing him for the first time in a long while. "After all of this?" Mark looked at her, truly seeing her brokenness, the wreckage of the woman he had once loved. He felt no triumph, no elation. "No, Amy," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm not happy, just empty." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "It was less about happiness and more about the fundamental injustice I felt, the betrayal of our shared life, our family." The words hung in the air, a final, unvarnished truth. Brenda and Amy signed the business buyout agreement a few days later. It was a somber moment, marking the official end of their partnership and, in many ways, their friendship. Brenda, her face relieved but weary, offered a small, hesitant hug. Amy accepted it, tears stinging her eyes. Frank, Brenda's estranged husband, was there too. He stood by Brenda, a quiet pillar of support. In the chaos of Amy's downfall, he and Brenda had found common ground, deciding to try and rebuild their own marriage, a flicker of hope amidst the ruin. Amy, left with minimal resources, found a low-paying job outside the catering world, starting over from scratch. The woman who had soared, driven by ambition, was now grounded, humbly beginning anew. Mark returned to his quiet house, the divorce final, the children settled, the revenge complete. He reflected on the wreckage, the lives splintered, the dreams crushed. He realized his justice had left him and his family scarred. The victory felt hollow, a harsh, enduring lesson in the true cost of retribution. The divorce was finalized in early autumn. The legal papers, crisp and official, granted Mark primary physical custody of Megan and Grace, with Amy afforded structured visitation rights. It was the outcome he had meticulously worked towards, a victory in the cold calculus of the courtroom. Amy moved into a small, rented house on the west side of Springfield, a stark contrast to the sprawling home she had once shared with Mark by Lake Springfield. Her new address, nestled among older, modest bungalows, was a daily reminder of all she had lost. Delights in Time, under Brenda's sole ownership and with Frank's renewed support, slowly began the arduous process of rebuilding its reputation. It was a long road paved with small, hard-won contracts, but Brenda was resilient. She restructured the business, focused on local events, and slowly, painstakingly, the whispers began to fade, replaced by the clatter of plates and the murmur of satisfied clients. Frank, a steady presence, found his way back into Brenda's life, their reconciliation a quiet counterpoint to the dramatic unraveling next door. Megan and Grace showed signs of healing. The therapy sessions, the consistent presence of their father, the new routines, all contributed to a gradual return to a semblance of normalcy. Yet the emotional scars remained, a quiet part of their family narrative, etched deep into their young lives. Mark often caught them looking at old photos, their faces pensive, carrying a burden he wished he could lift. Mark focused on rebuilding his relationship with his daughters. He created new routines, new traditions. Saturday mornings were for pancakes and board games. Sunday afternoons were for hikes in the state park. He became the steadfast anchor they needed, his presence unwavering. The large, empty house on East Lakeshore Drive, too full of ghosts and shattered dreams, became unbearable. He sold it, moving with the girls to a smaller, cozier home in a different neighborhood, a fresh start unburdened by the past's heavy shadow. Marge became an even greater pillar of support, her quiet strength invaluable. She helped Mark navigate the complexities of single parenthood, offering advice on everything from school projects to teenage anxieties. Her presence in their new home was a comforting, familiar warmth. Amy, in her small rented house, dedicated herself to her new, simpler life. She worked her low-paying job, saved what she could, and slowly, painstakingly, tried to earn back a sliver of trust from her daughters. Their visitations were quiet, often awkward, but she persevered, understanding that some things, like trust, had to be rebuilt from the ground up, one careful brick at a time. One crisp autumn day, at a school awards ceremony for Grace, Mark saw Amy. She stood at the back of the auditorium, a solitary figure. Their eyes met across the rows of parents and teachers. There was no anger, no accusation, just a brief, awkward nod exchanged, a silent acknowledgement of their shared, painful history. The chapter was closed, but the story remained etched on their faces. Mark understood then that while he had exacted his justice, the victory felt hollow. The promised satisfaction, the grand feeling of equilibrium restored, never truly arrived. The meticulous dismantling of Amy's life had left him not triumphant, but profoundly drained, the emotional cost far higher than he had anticipated. The story closes with Mark sitting by a new lake, not Lake Springfield, but a smaller, less grand body of water outside their new town. He watched his daughters play by the shore, their laughter echoing across the water, the quiet Midwestern evening reflecting the complex, often unspoken lessons learned. He carried the weight of his choices, understanding that while betrayal could be avenged, the past is never truly undone. The girls would grow older, carrying their own understanding of their mother's choices and their father's revenge. Mark eventually found a sense of peace, not happiness, but a quiet acceptance of his new life. His daughters, his anchor in the turbulent waters of memory. The enduring, complicated fabric of a Midwestern family, woven from choices made and consequences born, continued to unfold.